Hello, and welcome to a panel discussion on the newest exhibition from the Center for the Study of Political Graphics, Queer Rights Are Human Rights, posters of LGBTQ plus struggles and celebrations. Before we start, I'd like to introduce the center's office manager and social media manager, Camille Wong, and she will tell you some of the logistics of today. Camille?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for joining. So my name is Camille. My pronouns are she and they. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Today's event will be recorded and the video will be made available for streaming on CSPG's website. I've also enabled live transcript for the meeting today. Now I have. And let's see. Okay, if you wish to hide the live transcript, you may click on the live transcript button and then hide subtitle. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions to the panelists. Further comments, please use the chat function. We'll get to as many audience questions as possible at the end of the panel discussion. We welcome all respectful questions and comments that can make positive contributions for our panelists and fellow audience members. I'll take it, give it back to Carol.
Thank you. Before beginning our program, I would like to read a land acknowledgement that we acknowledge our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino and Tongva peoples. And I'd also like to thank our funders, the California Arts Council, the City of Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors through the Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture, and the Getty Foundation. I also would like to thank most of the posters in the exhibition come from the archive of the Center for the Study of Political Graphics, but we were also generously loaned digital prints from the ONE Archives with the University of Southern California and from Lincoln Cushing, who has access to the Michael Rossman's All of Us Are None archives, which is permanently located at the OMCA, the Oakland Museum of California Art. So I wish to thank everyone and thank all of you for coming. So again, I'm Carol Wells, pronouns she and her, and I'm the founder and the executive director of the Center for the Study of Political Graphics. I founded this over 30 years ago to be a resource for activists to help us in our organizing work, on our educational work, but also as a way of teaching us our own history. That was a mistake. A reminder that it's about to start. And in the years that we have now accumulated over 90,000 posters from all over the world, it has become really more than that. Not only don't activists know our own history, but the general public doesn't know our own history either, especially if people who are doing research are depending on primary sources like the New York Times or the LA Times to tell our history. They don't tell our history from our perspective. And the posters do. When they are made, they are a moment in time when they are organizing around a problem, an issue, a crisis, and they are central to organizing around educating people around the problem, calling people's attention to the problem, and inspiring them to become involved in fighting for justice. So when they're made, they have one purpose, and then years later, they still have a purpose, and that purpose is to remind us of the struggles of the past, remind us of that we're fighting for LGBTQ rights now. People were fighting for LGBTQ rights a long time ago. I mean, our earliest poster is from the 1950s, but we know that people were organizing around that much longer because of arrest records and things like that. But so the posters also tell us that when people are organizing around, whether it's women's rights, immigration, LGBTQ plus rights, they don't all do this. They don't all have the same tactics. And so we can learn from each other. We can learn from the past, and we can learn from other organizers around the world. And that's hopefully some of the conversation today will expand on that. The Center for the Study of Political Graphics has actually included LGBTQ plus posters in many exhibitions starting in the early 90s. But the first exhibition that we did totally focusing on the LGBTQ plus issues was in 2010. And this was, you could really see how the movement has changed by looking at the posters. In 2010, the primary issue, the posters that were the most contemporary, were dealing with marriage equality. Marriage equality is now legal throughout the United States. As of 2015, the Supreme Court legalized it for the entire country. And all of a sudden, that's no longer an issue. But in 2010, we had almost no posters dealing with transgender people. We were really searching for them. We're using student work because very few organizations were producing them. Now we almost had too many trans posters to even include. There are many of them, and it's like a major issue. And if you look at the history of the LGBTQ movement, there was even in the 80s, there was even debate whether to include trans in the initials that kept getting added to. First it was gay rights, then it was gay and lesbian rights, then it kept becoming more and more inclusive. But there was a struggle over including the term for trans. So this is all part of the history that in some small part is depicted, and we try to explain in extensive annotation the purpose of this exhibition. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our panel. And I'm going to just read them, introduce everyone at once, and then have questions and hopefully a conversation. So Loni Shibuyama, pronouns she, her, and hers, is the lead archivist at the ONE LGBTQ Archives at the USC Libraries, the largest LGBTQ archive in the world. She has worked there for 14 years, and it's my pleasure to work with her before this as well. Beginning in 2017, she initiated and managed a grant-funded project to catalog and digitize over 4,000 LGBTQ posters from the ONE Archive's vast collection. And Loni was also part of the curatorial committee for this exhibition. Actually, before I continue, I just want to say one thing about the curatorial committee. Every exhibition that we curate has a unique curatorial committee. And this is comprised of artists, activists, academics that are specializing in whatever the topic of the exhibition is. So it was, a couple of you'll hear from, I think Loni and I are the only two people that were part of that committee right now. Camille was also on that, as was our archivist, Emily Seltzer, and I'm blanking at everybody's name now, but I'll come up with everybody else in a second. So let me introduce now Jordan Pimer, pronouns he and him. He is an artist, an activist, and he worked on 2 posters that are included in this exhibition while he was a member of ACT UP Los Angeles. He also worked with arts collectives associated with ACT UP, including Critical Mass, Radical Exterior Decorators, acronym RED, and ATTACK is the acronym for Artists Take the Action in Cultural Crisis, crisis spelled with a K, so ATTACK spells right correctly. I'd never heard of these groups before, Jordan, and I do look forward to hearing about them. Jordan has worked with numerous international and Los Angeles area cultural organizations, including the Skirball Cultural Center and Highways Performance Space. Since 2014, he has been executive director of Art Power, the presenting program at UC San Diego. Romy Torrico, pronouns they, them, and theirs, is a formerly undocumented queer, trans, non-binary visual artist born in Iquique, Chile, and raised in Florida. They've been involved in the immigrant and migrant rights struggle for several years and have fused much of their work with personal experience and the stories their community shares. Torrico's work has been exhibited and published throughout the United States and internationally, and 3 of their posters are included in Queer Rights Are Human Rights. And finally, my pleasure to introduce Faye Hernandez, pronouns they and them. And Faye is a trans, Inglewood-raised immigrant artist, writer, and healer. Their poetry has been widely published, and Faye is the author of the full-length poetry collection, Hood Criatura, which was on NPR's Best Books of last year of 2020. They are a Define American Fellow for 2021 and are currently the board president of Gender Justice Los Angeles, whose executive director, Isaac Perez, was also part of the community curatorial team for this exhibition. Judy Cisneros was a photographer and a historian and activist, was also part of the curatorial committee. Isaac Perez, as we just mentioned, was part, and Liz Hale, who's an artist and an activist, and she was also part of the curatorial committee. And I think Emily Seltzer, yes, I mentioned her, and the rest of us, you know. So with that introductions out of the way, I would really like to start with with Loni, because you have the biggest archive in the world. And I don't know how you deal with it. What kind of things do you collect? What kind of things do you not collect? Like, what is your policy is my first question. And my second question is, how has being associated with USC impacted the ONE Archives? Because they existed for probably more years before they were associated than after. So Loni.
Yeah, so first of all, I would just want to thank Carol and CSPG for including us in this exhibition, and for inviting me to the curatorial committee and to this panel as well. When we set out to start cataloging and digitizing our posters, this is exactly the kind of thing I was hoping to, showcase more of our graphics in our collection, showcase the work of artists, known and unknown, that are represented in our archives. And so I'm very excited that we get to show more of these posters to the public. So, so to Carol, to your question, so ONE Archives started, it essentially started in the 1950s as a homophile organization. And what that meant was it was a group of gay and lesbian people who were celebrating homosexuality, getting together and forming groups to really talk about homosexuality and celebrate it rather than condemn it or call it a sickness, something like that. Over time, we've collected LGBT material since that period of time. We collect papers, a library of books and magazines, photo albums, photographs, even ephemera, artwork, and all sorts of things throughout that period of time. So we've accumulated 60 years worth of material, and our posters is a small portion of that, but it's something that hasn't gotten much attention until fairly recently, because they were, as Carol knows, they're hard to catalog, they're hard to collect and to preserve and to make digital copies of too, and that's also a very difficult part of it. But our collection scope is quite broad. We pretty much collect anything related to LGBT history, activism, art, communities that document their own lives, famous people and non-famous people, just documenting the experience of being LGBTQ in America. And yeah, and we became, so up until that time, we were pretty much a volunteer nonprofit organization for about 50 years. And then in 2010, we became a part of the University of Southern California. And that has allowed us to, have a little bit more sustainability in terms of being able to have a space and infrastructure, technical expertise, having access to that so that we can make these materials more available to the public. And it's brought with it, different complications for sure, being a part of a major university as big as USC, but at the same time, I think it helps us preserve the material in the long run, for sure. So.
And Jordan, you have a very long history, and I'd never heard of those. I've heard of critical mass, but I certainly had never heard of the other two. And as someone who works with political graphics and political art, it was a very sobering realization that there was a lot going on that was beyond my radar. So I wonder if you could tell a little bit about the relationship between the art collectives and ACT UP. Did ACT UP start them, and how come there were so many?
Well, I mean, part of it was ACT UP brought together just different people with different sensibilities, and sometimes we would come together for just one action, and people would have an idea, and they would get together, and things would be created for just one event, or for just a few events, and they wouldn't live for very long. One of the group's radical exterior decorators did some very illegal things at the Republican convention, and our goal was not to ever be known within a time frame where we could get arrested. But as groups, we would kind of take on different assignments from ACT UP for different projects that ACT UP had going on, and different people would come up with different ideas. And sometimes, I mean, honestly, sometimes it was just forming the collective that was all the fun of the project itself. Thinking about how we could work together, what ideas we had, what common visions we had, and creating a name and creating an aesthetic amongst ourselves, and then seeing that through. And with the organization Critical Mass, which probably was the longest lived, we probably spent somewhere between 3 and 6 months coming up with a name, and we had actually settled on the name Shiva, socially involved visual artists, and we kind of announced ourselves at an event at the Orange County Museum of Art that's what we were going to call ourselves, and somebody decided no, that was going to be potentially too offensive to Hindus the world over, and that we couldn't possibly call ourselves that. So we went with something. We went with Critical Mass, and so yeah, that is how we worked. And actually, the first project that we worked on was the Frontera, the Walker A Women's AIDS Award poster. And what's interesting with that was the image of all the skulls.
Show that poster. Is that possible to show that poster while Jordan's describing it? Thank you.
All those skulls were an image that was taken from the killing fields. Those were something that Josh Wells had that photograph. He found it in a book, and so those were actually skulls of Cambodians who were murdered by the Khmer Rouge. And we had just come off of the decision to not call ourselves Shiva, and here we were using Khmer Rouge murdered people, and so that launched in a whole other conversation about using other people's suffering and other people's lives.
I actually, from the conversations I've had with other artists over the years, the appropriation for images is quite common. I mean, it's quite common in poster making and in art making and in advertising. I mean, in all these kinds of things, it's very common. But it's interesting that almost never are the actual sources given. There's two kinds of appropriation. There's the obvious ones like the Mona Lisa or the Michelangelo or the fine art stuff. But for the other appropriate, like this, it's like you're trying to create something relatively fast. The issue is happening. People are dying right at that moment. And there's an image that speaks to it.
Yeah, and this was in some ways a really perfect image, because this was about access to health care for women who were incarcerated. And I don't know how well you're aware of this, but there was no AIDS ward in the California prison system, and women behind bars just had nothing. They had no real access to healthcare at all. And one of the real issues that ACT UP Los Angeles took on that no other ACT UP did was looking at incarcerated women in particular, but incarcerated people in general. And so this action in I believe it was December of 1990 was really kind of groundbreaking. And the context that these were people who were murdered by the state, and the skulls behind bars just seemed incredibly it seemed like an incredibly powerful connection.
Now, one of the most chilling things in the commentary in the online catalog is that the guards didn't want to have anything to do with the women with AIDS. And sometimes they would just realize that they had died. They had no health care. They had no people visiting them. They would only know they were dead because they had food trays lined up that hadn't been eaten.
Yeah, I mean, the stories that came out were absolutely horrific. And ACT UP Los Angeles really took this on as an issue because of one woman who came out of the prison systems and joined ACT UP LA, a woman named Mary Lucy, who continues to be a really a vital, strong person in the PWA community. I mean, she's just a huge force. But yeah, this was this poster was created as a response to that first action at a prison, and really, I think it was largely the photography, the artwork itself, the image itself was something that Josh Wells found, and I think it was Ellen Yellowbird and Michael Fuller who really did the type on this. I think my big contribution to it was reversing out the type on the top.
One of the things that I think is important about this poster, which is kind of typical of most posters, is that this poster's 30 years old,
Yeah.
over 30 years old. And yet every issue on here dealing with mass incarceration, dealing with healthcare, or rather lack of, is still an issue. And so the posters show how long people have been struggling and fighting and organizing around these issues. And I would like to reach out to Romy Torrico and really ask you, I mean, why did you become a political artist? What motivated you to, did certain posters inspire you? Did certain artists inspire you? How did that come about? You have actually more posters in the exhibition, by the way, than any other artist. You have 3 posters, which is pretty much the max that we allow for any one artist, because we want to give spread the opportunities around.
Yeah, feeling very honored, and thank you for having me. So my journey into political graphics started around college. I went to the University of Florida, and at that point I was undocumented. I was actually in school for architecture. So that's more or less where I started growing my passion for design and starting to gather up some skills digitally. I was also part of different activist groups on campus and around the state of Florida, mostly with other undocumented youth. And I think it was seeing all of these youth so passionate and so ready to throw down, and me trying to figure out where exactly I fit in all of this, right? Wanting to be able to support, wanting to be able to create a space for myself where I could continue supporting my community. So kind of crafting what that looked like for me. I started looking into documenting, and first I started with photography and videography. As part of an organization that I was with, we were documenting human rights abuses in Southwest Florida, and it was mostly around farm worker communities. So we would go around and anonymously get their information and any details about whatever human rights abuse had been committed by the police or by immigration. And as that project grew, and as folks allowed us to get to know them a little bit more and maybe be able to tell their stories with a little bit more information, I ended up getting photos of them, using their videos, and started creating digital images. So it started kind of small, just within my city in Naples, Immokalee, so areas in Southwest Florida. And eventually I started linking up with large organizations in the state, like the Florida Immigrant Coalition, where we started working on campaigns for Dreamers at that point. And that's basically where it kicked off for me. Eventually I was able to harness all the tools and all the skills that I had learned through videography, photography, and now digital graphics to really start documenting and storytelling in a way that felt ethical and responsible, and also that felt fulfilling for me as an individual who was also part of these communities, who was immigrant, migrant, and documented. It wasn't until maybe the mid 2000, a little bit past 2010, 2012, that I started doing work around queer identities. And that's around the time that I started coming to terms with my own queer identity and bringing into that transness. So yeah, I think around 2008 or 9, the main artists that I could remember that were doing work around immigrant and migrant rights were Fabiana Rodriguez, Melanie Cervantes, Ernesto Llena, and a big inspiration and consistent props to him, Julio Salgado. I was very inspired by and very much appreciated him for creating work that was about him, was about his identity, was about all of these different points that was very personal. So I think it was looking to these individuals and seeing the type of work that they were doing for movement spaces and picking up where they started, or maybe where they left off, is essentially kind of like the catalyst from my beginnings.
Yeah, and I think most of the people you just mentioned are also in this exhibition, and certainly all of them have been at past exhibitions as well. So that's I'm very familiar with their amazing work. So finally, I'd like to address Faye Hernandez. Faye, actually, you're in a dual role here. You're both representing Gender Justice Los Angeles, which is an organization. Your executive director, Isaac Perez, was part of the curatorial committee, but you're also a political artist, a political poster artist. So you get to address both things. Maybe start with the organizational aspect, because how does Gender Justice use posters? Do they commission them? Do people come to you with an idea? Do both happen? How do posters get used in your organizing?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. First off, just thank you for having me. Super happy to be representing Gender Justice LA, and myself as a visual artist, a writer, archivist, organizer. So yeah, I think I want to start off by just like using Tony Kate Bambaro's quote, as a cultural worker who belongs to an oppressed people, my job is to make the revolution irresistible. And I think that's essentially what Gender Justice LA does. And I myself as an artist do too. We have to make it irresistible. We got to make people look, and we got to let our people, the people we're striving for to protect, to see themselves in the work. Gender Justice LA specifically does like poster making, art making sessions at the park. We invite, transgender, non-conforming, intersex youth, Black, Indigenous people of color to show up and like create art in a together space, with, things like Black trans women, protect Black trans women, things of that sort. When it comes to organizing and connecting with other people in the community, yeah, I mean, like there's a lot of collaborations that happen. For example, recently there was a mutual aid effort, rapid release effort, where we reached out to Glory To It, who has artwork for Forward Together. And they were, she was graceful enough to like let us use her artwork for a post, and then we were just putting it on Instagram, on social media, to get people to donate, to bring people in to see the work, but to also allow the funds to go to necessary efforts. Specifically, it was a TGI Black Futures project, where Glory To It allowed us to use her work. So yeah, I mean, art brings community, brings people together, brings organizations and people to work together and provide services, exposure and support to one another. So yeah, those are some of the the ways that our grassroots organization uses art, because we think it's essential. We have to make it irresistible. We have to let people see themselves, the people we are serving.
Yeah, it's interesting that the word irresistible. There's so many. I'm just thinking of the quote from Che Guevara and I know I'm going to mangle it, but the true revolutionary is moved by profound feelings of love. I mean, there's that constant thread throughout people that they're involved in the movement because it's the right thing to do, but also it's the right thing to do on the larger level, on the human, compassionate love level.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And also, if any of you have questions for each other, feel free. This is a perfect time to ask that. But I want to ask all of you, and raise your hand. I'll call you in order that you raise your hand. We're in a real crisis now. I mean, we're in an existential crisis on many levels. Mass incarceration, immigration, climate change, LGBTQ, trans people of color are getting murdered higher than almost any other group of people. How can the work that you're doing help escalate the organizing? I mean, we've all been doing what we can, but I think that the crisis now is showing that we need to even do more. And so can we do more? And how can the work that you're all doing up the ante?
Well, I know that at least I've worked with several organizations in the past few years nationally. And one of the things I've been noticing is that right now creating art, well, now it's becoming more intentional, right? So it is becoming, it's part of the beginning of any organizing strategy. Or at least that's what the aim is, versus getting pinned to the very end and just being like, okay, well, here's our strategy and we need a piece of art. So I think little by little, we're starting to do things right. And we're using art to mobilize communities so that they see themselves represented, as Faye was saying. But also what I'm seeing now is that the messaging is changing slightly. And I think, in my opinion anyways, it's changing for the better. Instead of being something reactionary, it's becoming something that the communities can own, that's looking to the future, that's looking for something that is more hopeful, that is collective and creative. So instead of something like fight back, it's like, well, then let's come together and create a future that we want. And this is what it looks like. And these are the people who inhabit it, right? And this is what it looks like to be safe. So I think that work is already being done, and I think it's going to continue to get built upon. And I'm excited to see where it goes, honestly, because I think the work that has been put out for the last 10 years, if you look back, at least for me, in my own archives, the change is such a stark change, and it's really beautiful to see. It's really beautiful to see. While there is a space for rage and anger, and I'm all about that, I think that there is also space in what we create to be something perhaps more visionary. So I don't know, that's, yeah.
No, you hit something that several of us, or a lot of us, have been talking about for a while now. It's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to show the awful, to show the ugly, to show the violent, to show the suffering, to show the problem. It's a lot harder to envision what we want. It's a lot harder to show the future that we want, because it really we have to figure it out. We have to know what we want. And in the exhibitions that we do, they're divided into chapters. This one is, I think, 9 chapters. And I tried to end each section with an upbeat poster, because so many of them are talking about, death and torture and misery and problems and discrimination. And they would just be too down, and yet they're real. As you said, there's a place for rage. And I think, and the exhibitions have to have both. And so, it'd be interesting now that you've gotten to see it, how well we've actually achieved that. Because I know during the 60s, which was when my coming of age, when the posters and everything, I think there were upbeat ones, Make Love Not War. There were certainly those, but the ones that were of the violence and of the destruction and of the death were certainly more prominent. And I really, salute the generation of artists now that are really intentionally, and I think the intentionality is critical, intentionally coming up with posters that are affirmative and empowering and positive. But I agree. I think there's definitely room for both. I think, Faye's, your artwork is crosses, covers that also.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking, we're talking about, right, the importance of rage and anger, but then the importance of joy. And I was just thinking of GGLA and the ways in which, when we are mourning our fallen, trans folks in our communities, there's art, right? There's definitely art. Wherever we put the roses down, we have banners, we have art pieces that are significant, right? We have their faces in something tangible, right? As Romy said, like, we're documenting our aliveness we're documenting our resilience. And yeah, I'm just like, that informs a lot of my work. For example, I have a piece titled Love is Our Divine Birthright. And that's a piece that I submitted for Forward Together's 2019 Trans Day of Resilience. And yeah, I mean, what we see is a figure who's like larger than life, with their hands over a younger queer trans person, and we're bearing witness to this thing that we've been robbed of so much, right? It's as trans people of color, specifically as undocumented trans people, we are told that we don't exist, that we should, be we're aliens, right? In the face of people on multiple fronts in all of these different intersections. And for me, I'm like, no, we're not. I'm like, we're actually something ancient that life and existence is bringing to the forefront of this revolution. And so a lot of my work tends to be a little bit more kind of whimsical and spiritual for that reason, because I do see that, the visions are there. We know what we want in the new world. We feel it. I can taste it. It's a little bonfire by the beach and the stars are seeable because there's no pollution. There's trans kids running around naked, and everything is just, there's no shame there. And we're free and there's no policing. And I think that's what I try to capture in my work, or I go into my pieces with that intent.
And then Jordan, you were talking about, I think it's not just, I know ACT UP did a lot of agitprop. And I know agitprop is something that a lot of groups are still doing. It's not just posters, but there's puppets, there's, flash mobs, I think, are something, I don't know when they first developed, but it's an outgrowth of the agitprop. And I'm really curious if you are up to saying what those illegal things that you did if the time limit is up and you wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you about some of them, and actually, one of the great things that happened sort of in conjunction with ACT UP, the group Attack, Artists Take the Action in Cultural Crisis, which was really focused around the far right's attacks on the NEA, but was an offshoot of ACT UP. We created the art criminal chain gang, and we had painters' outfits that were striped. We had heads of artists who throughout history had been criminalized, from Michelangelo to Garcia Lorca to Oscar Wilde. We made a giant cardboard chain. We walked down Wilshire Boulevard. We arrested different cultural sites like LACMA for crimes against the street. We then held a protest in front of the federal building downtown, which led to, I think, 18 people getting arrested. At one point, we also did a sing-in with a mobile jail cell in front of the opening night of Fidelio at the Music Center. So those were some of the less illegal ones. Some of the more illegal ones, we at the Republican convention of whenever George Bush didn't get reelected. So that was what, 96 maybe, or 92. We defaced a lot of billboards in many different ways, from paint guns to stickers to postering. We used ACT UP paraphernalia to bumper sticker and otherwise deface police cars, and did other things that probably shouldn't be talking about publicly.
It's good it doesn't throw me around for a while. By the way, I do invite the audience to right into the Q&A if you have questions. You are absolutely welcome to participate in this. That's part of the purpose. When the AIDS epidemic happened, it really was life-changing on many levels. I mean, I think a lot of people came out because it was a life and death issue. The creativity of ACT UP was like heads and tails over most creativity that we saw among political activists and art activists in the United States. Other countries, there was a lot of that type of creativity, but I don't think it was quite as, well, it was a life and death issue. So people were really pushing the limits around the AIDS crisis, the AIDS epidemic. How has, I should have rephrased it, has COVID-19 done a similar thing, but obviously to a broader swath of the population? And if so, how? And if not, why do you think? I know it's a complicated question, but simplify it. Just how has COVID, if it has, affected, political poster production and organizing?
I haven't seen any political posters on COVID. Have you?
Just the mask wearing and the shot, the mask wearing and getting the shot. But I wasn't referring to COVID. I mean, that's certainly a legitimate part of the question, COVID on COVID. But COVID effect, for example, the fact that we're so many Black Lives Matter marches with so many people was astounding, given that was at the height of the epidemic, of the pandemic. They would have been a lot larger had the pandemic not been going on. So that's maybe a concrete thing that we could say, as huge as they were, and in every single state, it was phenomenal. But the fact that they were going on during the pandemic was even more phenomenal. So that's the kind of thing that I'm looking for.
I'm wondering if somewhere in another state, perhaps not California, there were anti-vaccine, anti-COVID posters being created saying, wake up, you're losing your rights to a fake to a fake illness.
Yeah,
I certainly never saw them, but you have to wonder.
Yeah, well, it's the other interesting is that the right wing really wasn't producing good graphics until relatively recently. The progressive artists and the progressive organizers and the progressive movement really, I mean, like they were during the Vietnam War or during the Central America, solidarity struggle. There were a handful of support what the United States is doing, of support our troops, of support the war. But they really, I don't think it really, except maybe the last, to the 21st century, I think, did we start seeing the right wing start using, in this country, in the United States, certainly the fascists and, think of Nazi propaganda posters were, had some of their best artists working for them. But, and they're still producing fascist posters in Europe. That fascism is on the rise throughout the world. But I think in the United States, it was interesting, maybe because they had corporate media, they were able to get their, they have Fox News. They didn't have to make posters because they had Fox News. But you're now seeing a surprisingly number of trained artists making right-wing propaganda on, posters, which I find very, disturbing, but it's also surprising that it took them so long because it's so powerful.
Is it okay if I add something to what we were talking about?
Please.
So I know that Gender Justice LA has a Transmasculine Health Justice LA that happened, and Romy was one of the folks, was the folk that created the artwork that was pretty much leading these resources, bringing trans, gender nonconforming, intersex folks to resources around COVID. And so in that particular way, I did see how our organization kind of led with art. If you go to the website tmhealthstudyla.org, I'll say that one more time in case anyone can type it down and put it in the chat, but tmhealthstudyla.org. You can see like all of Romi's artwork everywhere, highlighting the people on the team, highlighting the resources, highlighting the community and the work that they're doing. And so in that ways, I see definitely how powerful it is to continue organizing around art and using it as obviously creating irresistibility, but also bringing awareness to resources that are necessary, especially for our communities.
And to add on to that, I was also approached about this project that is going to be about specifically vaccinations, but also consent, right? And what that looks like for children. And so being able to get resources in the hands of parents and caretakers so that they know and can make informed decisions and bring their children into these discussions, right? So I think while COVID to a degree maybe didn't allow folks the access to go out in different ways, I think that digital activism, if you can call it that, really, really got harnessed and pushed forward. And I think, I don't know, in the past year and a half, it definitely has made a huge difference and impact, at least from what I've seen in social media spaces. And to talk about a little bit regarding the, I guess, the anti-COVID vaccine propaganda. I don't know if it's just because I'm in Florida or have been for the past few months, but while it's not necessarily art per se, I have seen some graphics being in a very conservative part of Florida right now regarding COVID, not so much the vaccine, but like the mask wearing perhaps. And there's people that are shown with socialist hats wearing the mask. And then there's people shown with like American top hats without masks. So basically those folks are the heroes and everybody else is a socialist or something like that. So I think that while it's not necessarily in your face, like, look at this beautiful poster, I think there are images to some degree that are being created by right-wing folks, specifically around COVID, that it's just enough to get people to pay attention and maybe think about it for a second and say, huh, okay, maybe I won't wear a mask. And, you know, we have like this doofus of a governor in Florida that's pushing all these agendas, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think COVID has definitely brought to light a lot of things regarding accessibility for sure.
Yeah, and it's certainly shown the need for universal health care, which a lot of posters are dealing with. But it's going to be interesting to see what the new normal is going to be. It's not going to be the old normal. I mean, in some ways it may be, but I think in general, I think the old normal is, you know, it's kind of like looking at, you know, gasoline that was 29 cents a gallon. It was cheap, but look at the damage look at the addiction that it allowed us to get. And we're paying for it. We're all paying for it now. So that's kind of interesting. So before we're getting close to the end, what is your next project for both the artists and the people with organizations? What is your next project? You know, we may as well continue with Romy. What is the next project that you're going to be pursuing? And so the other three of you can think about how you're going to answer the question.
I mean, there's always a few projects on the horizon. But I think a personal project of mine will be documenting my return to my home country, which I'm going to be doing for the first time this September. So that'll be interesting. I'm curious to see what means I'm going to document with, whether it's camera, film, or something digital in terms of like illustration. But I think for me, that's going to be something pretty close to my heart and something that's going to be both heavy and joyous. So.
How old were you when you left?
I left in '94, so I was about 5 years old.
Yeah, we have hundreds of posters, Chilean posters that were done from Chile that were done before the coup in '73, And then we have hundreds done internationally following the coup.
Yeah,
So-
the coup is something I definitely have in mind a lot, especially around the time that Trump was elected and around the time that Trump got pushed out. I remember it was around 2016 that I first started pushing for my papers. I filed for adjustment of status, and I remember kind of what Jordan was talking about. There's different ways that artists and activists get put on the line of fire. And I remember I was doing very, very political work, specifically against immigration. And I was a little scared that that could possibly hinder my adjustment of status. So I feel very fortunate to be able to create in the atmosphere that we're in now.
Faye?
Currently, I'm working on doing an audiobook of my poetry collection. And I want to do a book of illustration. So it's very, very personal. I just want to engage my readers as much as possible. My book, Hood Criatura, published by Sundress Publications in 2020, is still not in stores like at Barnes and Noble. Like it could be bought online, but you know, there's still like a lucha fight to be like, why is my book not accessible, or why is it not in print in stores? And it could be a series of reasons, but I'm pushing that specifically and trying to accompany it with a book of illustrations, kind of following the trajectory of my book with my original art pieces, and doing a book, an audiobook for it, so that, you know, folks anywhere can hear it and listen to it.
And Loni, what are your future projects with the ONE Archives?
Yeah, so we have, you know, we're going to continue to, you know, catalog our collections and make them accessible. But for the posters in particular, you know, I'm really hoping to promote them as much as possible, have folks, people can browse our databases and look through the posters, and have more researchers and exhibitions of these graphics. And you know, I think I especially want, I especially look forward to folks seeing the breadth of the political graphics in our collection, as well as in this exhibition, because you know, as Romy and Faye were talking about before, the different kinds of messaging, the different kinds of the numerous ways that people are trying to connect with connect with the public through their art, through these political graphics. I think it's documented in posters in a way that is not in too many other mediums. And I think it shows, you know, it shows trying to reach people through humor, through provocative images, through compassion, through a number of different ways of reaching people, and or encouraging people to move on you know, on a political issue. I think the political graphics shows all those different types of messaging, all the different types of ways of people and artists are trying to connect. And I think in that way, it sort of counters some of the narrative, I mean, the dominant narratives of LGBT history that, you know, we hear so often, that people were, you know, in the closet and things were, you know, and all sorts of different things. There's, you know, all sorts of different dominant narratives that we're trying, that these posters show that it was just so much more than that. It documents so much more of that history, so many more experiences. And that's what I'm really hoping that these posters show.
No, thank you. And finally, Jordan, and then you were working at UC San Diego, so that's, you've got a whole other.
Yeah, so I've taken on the agitprop performance and moved on to formal performance. So my full-time gig is down here in San Diego, but I've been meeting pretty regularly these days, well, regularly virtually, with colleagues from ACT UP. So this last little while. It may be 30 years ago, but ACT UP seems very, very, very present, and we're looking at the past and trying to figure out exactly at this moment when COVID is still quite present, what it is we can learn from 30 years ago and how we can take it forward, and the lessons that we've learned and how they can be applied to today.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank the whole panel. I also want to thank the audience who've been stay the whole time, not dropping off. I want to remind people that at 4:30, the Center for the Study of Political Graphics is also sponsoring a poster making workshop with an artist that we've worked with for a long time, Ernesto Vasquez. He's an artist, he's an activist, he's from East LA, and he does really amazing stuff using things you have at home. So that's at 4:30. I also want to properly thank the curatorial committee, Liz Hale, Isaac Perez, Loni Shibuyama, Judy Cisneros, Emily Seltzer, Camille Wong, and myself. We're all part of the committee. And one of the Center's future projects is actually to digitize more posters and get them online. We have 8,200 searchable posters available through our website right now, and we're hoping to add thousands to that within the next year. And we also have 18 fully annotated exhibitions online. So go to our website, politicalgraphics.org, sign up for our mailing list, make an appointment to come research at the archive once you're fully vaccinated. We look forward to seeing you really soon. Thank you so much, Jordan, Faye, Lonnie, and Romy. And I was just so moved to have met you, to have worked with you, and to have your work in our collection. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol, Camille, and everyone. I really want to say thank you, especially on behalf of my colleagues who are no longer with us. It just means so much to me, particularly on behalf of Josh.
Thank you.